In this third video for solving quadratic equations by using the quadratic formula, we are going to set up our own quadratic formula and then do all the calculations. So we're going to do the problem all the way through. So if it asks you to solve a quadratic equation using the quadratic formula, we'll identify A, B, and C, we'll plug it into the formula, we'll do our calculations, and we'll find our solutions that make the equation true. So in our first one, we're going to solve x squared minus 4x plus 2 equals 0. So we can identify A, B, and C. A is the coefficient in front of x squared, so that's 1. B is the coefficient in front of x, so that's negative 4. And C is the constant, the term without the variable, so it's positive 2. So now we plug it in to our quadratic formula, which we have down here at the bottom. All right, so let's substitute it in. So x equals, so our solutions are going to be equal to negative goes first of b, so parenthesis, anytime we substitute it in, let's put a parenthesis, b is negative 4. Okay. Then I have the plus or minus. Then I have the square root symbol. And the first thing under the square root symbol is b, and it's squared. So when we plug in b, which is negative 4, put it in parentheses, squared. So I have all that, minus 4, part of the formula, always put that in, times a was 1, times c is 2, and then all over 2 times a, so 2 times whatever the a is, which is 1. Now we start to do our calculations, and when I do my calculations I like to do what's under the square root first. So I take all of this under the square root, which is negative 4 in parentheses squared minus 4 times 1 times 2, and I put that into my calculator. And I get 8. So I write down negative of negative 4, so I'm rewriting everything the way it is, except when I get to this square root underneath, I know all of that came out to 8, all over, still 2 times 1, and in my next step, I like to do those parentheses, so I have negative of negative 4, and if you don't remember what that is, you can put it in your calculator, and it will give you positive 4, plus or minus, keep the square root of 8, all over, 2 times 1 is 2 now. This is where I split it up. So I get 4 plus square root of 8, and then divide that by 2. And my other answer, x equals 4 minus square root of 8, and divide that by 2. Okay, so I'm going to do each of those in the calculator. Don't forget, when we do the numerator, 4 plus square root of 8 or 4 minus square root of 8, make sure you hit enter before you divide by 2. 4 plus square root of 8, and then divide by 2 after you hit enter. So my first answer is 3.41. Now I'm going to find my other answer. So 4 minus square root of 8 came up with that decimal, but I have to remember to divide it by 2. That was in the denominator, so my next answer is 0.59. Alright, so those are my two solutions, and I could substitute them each back in for the x's, and each time I plug it back in it would make the equation true. Alright, so let's do one more. Again, we're going to solve this quadratic formula. First thing we do is we find A, B, and C, and if you'd like to try this one on your own, go ahead, hit pause, and then you can check your answer after. Alright, so I find A equals 2. It's the coefficient in front of x squared. B equals negative 3, and C equals 8. Okay, now I'm going to use the quadratic formula down here at the bottom, and I'm going to substitute it in. So x equals, there's always a negative sign, and then we substitute in the b, which was negative 3, plus or minus the square root of, the first thing under the square root is a b, and it's squared, so put the b in parentheses, squared, minus 4 times then is an a, which was 2, times c, which was 8, all over. The bottom of the formula says 2 times a. So 2 times 2. All right, to get my next step, I like to do what's underneath the square roots. Again, I think I said this before, it's called the discriminant. You'll learn more about that in Algebra 2. Okay, so I put in the discriminant, negative 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times 8, and I found that it was negative 55. So minus negative 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 55 over 2 times 2. X equals negative of negative 3 is positive 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 55 all over 4. I'm going to break it up. Addition. And then subtraction. Okay, and then I can go to my calculator and plug it in. But before I go to my calculator, I'm noticing I have a negative under the square root. And hopefully you remember, we can't take the square root of a negative. So I could put it in my calculator, but it would either tell me no real solutions, or it would give me something with I, which I said is imaginary, which we can't have. We don't know what that is yet. So that means the solutions to this problem is that there are no solutions. This one doesn't have any solutions. We actually could have even stopped the problem back up here, and we could have said no solution at this point, because as soon as you see a negative under the square root, we cannot have that. There are no numbers for x that would make this equation true.